First one, should all component code be kept in a single file? Or is it a good practice to break them into separate HTML, CSS, and JS files? So to me, this is, I don't think there is a hard rule about this. Personally, I prefer keeping them in a single file as much as I can. And if a file gets long enough that you feel it's like getting difficult to scroll around, it's probably a good sign that you start considering splitting it into more components. Right? So a common case is when you have a considerable amount of static content, so your template gets really huge. This is probably a good reason to split out the template into a separate file. But most I would say utility components or typical components that you write should be within the reasonable length so that you don't feel uncomfortable dealing with this file. If it's super long, especially with the JavaScript section. If your JavaScript section gets super long, it's probably time to start considering how to refactoring it into smaller units of components with more dedicated responsibilities. Next question. First it was Angular, then it was web components. How does Vue stave off being obsolete when the next new thing comes out? I don't know if this question means AngularJS and web components are now obsolete or they are the new things. Honestly, I think, so AngularJS was first out back in like 2009. Right? It's like 8 years. Considering JavaScript time, it's like it's lived for an eternity and it's still there. I mean, it's not dead. There's still a lot of systems running on Angular 1.x. Right? Web components, in some sense, it's the thing about web components is people think like web components is going to make all the frameworks obsolete, which is definitely not true because web components, as they are spec, they are the lower level primitives. Provided by the platform, which frameworks can then leverage to simplify their internal implementation and make themselves more efficient in some way. This is why even though we have web components, like Chrome supports all the web component features, Google still needs to build Polymer. Polymer is a framework on top of web components because web components doesn't address the problem of declarative rendering, reacting to state changes. And the higher level architecture of how components communicate with one another, the data flow between them, and the ecosystem building single page applications, these are not addressed by web components at all. On the other hand, most of these frameworks actually evolve to take advantage of these lower level primitives like custom elements or HTML imports, which unfortunately is no longer going to be a spec. But they're working on something new called HTML modules, which is very much like Vue's single file components. And if that thing becomes a reality, we may eventually just, it's very possible that an HTML module would just be a valid Vue file. And then you can just directly use it in your browser, which would be awesome. So the thing about future standards is frameworks will evolve to take advantage of new standards coming out. New standards are not going to make frameworks obsolete. There are always userland problems that can only be addressed by userland frameworks. The other thing is competition between different frameworks. Right? I think we are at a stage where we probably went through an age of like explosive growth in terms of new ideas in the JavaScript world, and I think we've gradually arrived at the point where most of these mainstream solutions are convergent onto a common set of principles, like components, and the boundary of components, the contracts between components, managing state management, and how you would typically do routing in a single page application, right? If you are familiar with all these mainstream solutions, you will find that they share more underneath, like the core principles are extremely similar. And I believe that's, with these core principles, these frameworks are, it's very hard for these currently mainstream frameworks to suddenly just go out of fashion because they have established ecosystems and training resources and everything, and the momentum is really hard to say suddenly unsettled by a new thing, which if it doesn't provide a fundamental paradigm shift, it's very unlikely that these mainstream solutions are going to suddenly become obsolete. And when does the next paradigm shift appear? Like, honestly, I don't know. And I don't think it's that easy to come up with that shift. If you look at the language design landscape, right? Like, we've seen these radical functional languages like 20 years ago, and today we're still using C and Go and these very, I guess, robust but kind of down-to-earth solutions, because I believe most of the mainstream solutions today, like React, Angular, and Vue, they have already arrived at this sort of balance where we expose this very solid and stable way of working with UI on the web. And even if there are fundamental new ideas coming out, if they're at the implementation level or the platform level, we can actually evolve to adopt them without like changing how we work at a higher level. So the only chance that we become obsolete is when maybe WebAssembly, in turns like someone invented a whole new thing that's parallel to the web, and everybody is just like, web is dead, so are the web frameworks. But I don't think that day is coming very soon, like at least 10 years off. So that'll probably live longer than a lot of the products being built. I'm just being pessimistic. But next question. Weex versus NativeScript. So for those who are not familiar with these two things, they're both free projects that allows you to write web-like code, but render native components on iOS and Android, kind of like React Native for Vue. And Weex is a project that's built by Alibaba, which is the biggest internet company in China, and they use it in production. And they have so all of these projects are actually split in two layers. The one is the underlying native rendering engines, and the higher level is the JavaScript runtime. So Weex uses Vue as the default JavaScript runtime. So most of these native engines can actually swap their JavaScript runtime. So Weex can work with the Vue runtime. They have a React-like DSL called Rax. Also, NativeScript, the default runtime is Angular 2, but you can sort of swap it with Vue. So I actually don't know enough about NativeScript to say which one is better. What I know about Weex is Alibaba uses in production in a lot of their major core products. So I would say it's rock solid. The project is also donated to Apache, so it's an Apache Foundation project. So you can sort of have a bit more trust in how they handle the open source stuff. The drawback of Weex is they're not that active in community engagement in the West because the company is in China, and it takes a lot of extra effort to make the English documentation and community support good. But they told me they're planning to work on it early next year, so hopefully we can see some improvement there. NativeScript, so the native part of NativeScript, I don't know enough to make assumptions. The integration between NativeScript and Vue is, I would say sadly, it's not production ready yet. So at this stage, if you want to actually start with one of them for production, I would recommend Weex, but you should keep an eye on NativeScript because they might provide some better documentation in the future, but at this moment, I would say Weex over NativeScript, if you are really in a hurry to get into production. So next, any plan to officially support TypeScript? Well, the answer is we already do. So I don't know if you've seen the recent, we've just published a blog post on our official blog on Medium, detailing some changes that's upcoming in 2.5. And so before 2.5, in Vue's current form, we already provide official typings, TypeScript typings for the core library, for Vuex, for Vue router, so essentially when you install npm frontend, you already get the typings for those libraries. The current state is you need to use a class decorator to get proper type inference for your components, and that makes them look very much like Angular 2 in some way. But in 2.5, so the TypeScript team has like come up with these new features and they submitted a PR that makes it possible to get proper inference, even if you're just using the plain default Vue API. So that's going to ship in 2.5. And the good news is even if you don't use TypeScript, as long as you're using VS Code Invader, which is the extension uses an internal package called Vue Language Server, which in turn uses TypeScript compiler to analyze your plain JavaScript, and then infers a lot of things about it, so you can get like magic auto completions about existing props and data on your instance. You can get API auto completion on Vue Router or Vuex and all that stuff. So short answer is we already do. It's just like we don't have an official CLI template for it, but we're planning to do that in the next iteration of our CLI. So when that's out, you'll just be able to kick off a new Vue TypeScript project with just one command. And yeah. Next question. What was your vision when you created Vue.js? To be honest, when I first worked on Vue.js, I had no vision. Like, I was just scratching my own itch. I was like, I want to build this library that I would enjoy using myself. And I think this keyword is enjoy using. And that's kind of been consistent, even though the thing has evolved along the way and changed a lot. But the key is we want to build something that's enjoyable to use. We want to put make it approachable. We want to focus on development experience, the learning curve, the documentation, and everything. We want to make it easy for people to use it, to enable more people to enjoy working on web apps. So that's the whole goal. Next question. Any advice on portfolio when applying to Parson's DT program? So I graduated from Parson's DT program. And how did you go from art history to tech? Yeah, my undergrad was in art history. But the short answer is I learned most of the stuff myself. But I think it's mostly about when you learn something, it's mostly about the passion. If you have experienced this thing like that, you're in the zone and you can just keep working on something for like 10 hours in a row without realizing it, you're probably gonna be onto something, right? I think that's how it happened to me when I saw some like cool like Chrome experiments on the web. I was like, holy crap, JavaScript is cool, I wanna learn it. And I started learning it, and everything just kind of was natural because I felt like I'm really passionate about it. I want to learn it, so I just naturally switched. And in terms of portfolio advice, honestly, I think I can't really give like really good advice on this one because I no longer know how they evaluate applicants. But I think a good I guess diverse skill set would probably be good because DT is design technology, so by nature it's like a hybrid program, so you sort of need to be fluent in design to some extent and also fluent in tech to some extent. So demonstrating that you are sort of a bit of a hybrid would probably give you a good edge in it. Next question, Angular uses two-way bounding and HTML directives, and what are the major advantages of using Vue over AngularJS? I don't know if you're referring to Angular 1 in specific or Angular 2 because they're very different things. But honestly, like, I think it's probably wrong to say, like, compare frameworks by saying what are the advantages of using A over B. Because such statements can only be made when we have the context. Like, what's your experience? Did you used to work on Java or C# enterprise apps, or are you just like learning JavaScript? Is your team, how's your team's background? How big is your team? What type of apps you're building? Is it like a super big enterprise app with like 30 people working on it? Or are you trying to get fast and scrappy and trying to get to the market as fast as you can? So these are the things you need to consider when you're picking frameworks. And so it would just grow into this huge article about what's the specific scenario. So I would avoid digging into that now, but I think the key is understanding what your team and your product and your company is looking for, and then try to evaluate different frameworks on how their strengths in those areas, instead of just making blanket statements like A is better than B, because it always depends on the use case and context. Next is, what do you think the idea of using service worker in Vue? So, well, service worker isn't necessarily tightly coupled with any framework, because it's just a platform feature that you can leverage in any framework. We do have this official PWA CLI template, which already provides service worker integration, and it's actually contributed by Ali Osmani and the Google team. Jeff actually gave a talk at last meetup about the PWA template. So it's sort of, service worker is already integrated in that template if you want to leverage it. But at the lower level, they are not necessarily coupled. You can use service worker any way you see fit within a Vue app. What are Vue.js anti-patterns you tell people to watch out for? Well, anti-patterns. I see a lot of people trying to, because Vue is, in some way the API is more, I guess, more flexible than React. An example is in React, you don't really have access to the component instance that easily. Like you cannot, the only thing you get is this, but you cannot like reach for a child component or your parent component, whereas in Vue you can. It's flexible and powerful in some use cases, but it's pretty easy for people to fall into the sort of just reach for the parent to do something quick and dirty. If you do that too often, then your parent and your child are tightly coupled, and you are refactoring or moving things around, things start to break and you freak out. So it's always better to think in a more declarative fashion, avoid imperative tight coupling, imperative manipulations, and all that kind of stuff. And also use more, I think it's also a good thing to learn about other frameworks, because there are a lot of good ideas in React that you can totally apply to Vue as well. Like, even if you use Vue, and if you keep an eye on good patterns coming out of the React community, you'll find it benefits you nonetheless. Like, there are a lot of things shared between frameworks. Next is, would I be used to use Vue with RN as the V layer? Very interesting question, because there, in fact, is a project called React Vue. So just search for it on GitHub. Someone actually made it. Like you can, it's like seamless. You just like import a Vue file in your React app, and it becomes a React component, and then you can just use it. Which is pretty amazing, in my opinion. I don't know how robust it is though, so you might have to try it out yourself. Next, which end-to-end testing framework should we use with Vue? I personally use Nightwatch because it's a pretty decent, like, contained package. You don't have to wrangle with setting up Selenium, finding the good driver, and all the stuff. So I would say I personally use that, but honestly, I've dabbled with a lot of other solutions. Like Nightwatch is the one that I find that's most streamlined in terms of setting up and getting things working. But your mileage may vary. I think it's, like my recommendation would be Nightwatch, but I would recommend you always like try out different things to find what's best for yourself. So, next one is Avoriaz going to become the official Vue test library? In some sense, yes, because Ed, who is the author of Avoriaz, is actually working on Vue, like the Vue test utils. The API will be largely the same with some improvements. We have some design discussions that when we kick off the official library. In particular, we improved the wrapper when you find multiple things, and also improved how you would test components with things that you need to inject dependencies to, like using VueNYC, using Vue router. And that is actually, we also improved the documentation quite a bit, I believe. I think Ed is actually working on a like full-length testing guide. So it's kind of like yes and no. It's kind of like the spiritual successor to Avoriaz, I would say. Then, well, I think I'll skip the next one. That's another one. I would love to contribute to Vue.js. Where do I start? So there are different ways you can contribute, right? The easiest one is join our Discord chat room and just talk with people, answer their questions, answer questions on Stack Overflow, whatever you can. If you are want to dig more into actually running code, you can look at the GitHub issues. If there are new issues popping up, you can try to help us triage it, find out what's actually going on. If it's lacking reproduction, you can try to provide one. And then if you believe you found out what's wrong, you can suggest solutions or even just submit the PR to fix things. And if you want to submit PRs, that's where you need to actually understand how the development setup of Vue is. So in our repository, we have a contribution guide in the .github folder. There is a contribution guide that sort of walks you through how to set up the dev environment, how to run the tests, how the folder structure looks like. But there are a bunch of prerequisites, like you need to understand how NPM, rollup, webpack, flow, all this stuff, how they work, to be able to sort of understand how the build system work together. But if you follow the source code is probably the biggest blocker because it's not organized in a way that someone from outside can just jump into. But we're trying to improve that. I'm planning to write a sort of like a contributor handbook that just walks you through like how Vue actually is assembled and works, from what happens when you create a Vue instance and all that. So it's like dissecting all the internals to help people to be easier to jump into the code base. Do we still have time?
I just wanted to thank creator of Angular for this great question. Apparently that's him, Mishko Kirui, right?
Oh! Yeah. Wait, is that true?
No.
Is that real Mishko?
Is there Mishko in the audience? No, it's not real Mishko. No.
That would be great if Mishko wants to contribute to Vue. Come on. So, do you still have time, or?
Yeah, I still have 5 minutes. Let's do like 3 more questions or something.
Okay. So, I think this one is kind of already answered. Why isn't Ref reactive? I think that's a bit too technical to explain here. But the short answer is it's technically difficult to make it reactive and like work reasonably. The thing is like refs are populated after the first render. So if you access in the first render, you don't get anything. So there's no way to make it reactive. So that's the short answer. But maybe there could be some hacks, but like from the time we spent on it, we didn't find a reasonable way to actually make it work in all edge cases. How was your experience with TS-Lint? TS-Lint is pretty nice if you use TypeScript. I personally don't, so I can't say too much about it. The 2.5 support is really mostly about being able to just use out-of-the-box Vue API with great TS inference. And it also benefits plain JavaScript users. How complex it is to integrate Vue into legacy projects? It's actually, I would say it's pretty simple because the strength of Vue is you don't necessarily need a build tool. You don't have to use single file components if you don't want to. You can just link it from a CDN and just use it on a page. If that's, right? If you're trying to integrate into something that's existing, a big app that already exists, that's probably the easiest way to do it. Yeah, so how do you pronounce your framework? I think that's going to be the last question. It is called Vue. All right? It's the first sentence in the whole documentation, so please read the docs.